The 1980s were the era of high-concept action. The decade was dominated by muscle-bound idols like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone on the big screen, but before those guys hit their stride towards the middle of the decade, the genre was a little more open. And the films of the first half of the decade perhaps had a little bit more in common with the ones that came out towards the end of the 70s, when heroes were very much in the everyman mold. One of the best of those early 80s action movies is definitely 1983's Blue Thunder, a movie that feels somewhat obscure nowadays but was a pretty big hit the year it came out, with it even spawning a TV series. Actually, maybe even two, but we'll get to that a bit later. Oddly, of many of the decade's high-concept films, it feels distinctly modern in attitudes with its fears of government overreach, loss of personal liberty, and high-level corruption. So let us tell you all about what the happened to Blue Thunder. Jump back to the late 70s. At the time, writers Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby were struggling writers and roommates in Los Angeles, and they started tinkering around with the script when being annoyed by low-flying LAPD police helicopters. In 1979, O'Bannon's Alien was a serious hit, and suddenly Blue Thunder had some real heat behind it, being acquired by Columbia Pictures, who opted to produce the film through their deal with Rastar, a company headed by super agent Ray Stark, who bankrolled many of Columbia's most expensive 80s movies, including Annie and The Toy. So Blue Thunder would be a different kind of action movie for its day, with it the story of a PTSD-afflicted helicopter pilot for the LAPD named Frank Murphy, played by Roy Scheider. While investigating the death of a congresswoman whose murder he was unable to stop from his helicopter, partially because him and his young partner were watching some woman do yoga naked, but I digress, he is temporarily reassigned to a special detail where he's to test fly a state-of-the-art combat helicopter named Blue Thunder, which is to be used for crowd control, or so they say, during the upcoming, at the time, 1984 Summer Olympics. While piloting Blue Thunder, not only does he discover the myriad of ways it can be used to spy on an unwilling population, but he also discovers there's a conspiracy involving the helicopter that played a part in the murder of the congresswoman. What's worse is that the head of the Blue Thunder project is his former CEO from Vietnam, Colonel F.E. Cochran.
F.E. What's the F.E. stand for?
Everybody.
Played by a deliciously evil Malcolm McDowell, who, when he realizes Murphy and his young partner know too much, orders their deaths. Too late to save his young partner, who's played by a very young Daniel Stern, Murphy steals Blue Thunder and engages in aerial warfare over the skies of downtown Los Angeles. So one can for sure see why Blue Thunder was appealing for studio executives at the time. A little movie called Star Wars had come out and broke new ground as far as visual effects went, and suddenly the impossible became possible, and audiences expected bigger and bigger movies. Blue Thunder, with its futuristic helicopter, would marry elements of science fiction, specifically the techno-thriller, with elements of a grounded cop drama. The movie, in a lot of ways, is kind of like Dirty Harry in a helicopter. It also proved to be rather timely, as when the film was in its rather lengthy post-production, which took place over more than 2 years, Knight Rider had become a major hit on TV, with it sporting a futuristic car named Kit with some of the bells and whistles found in the Blue Thunder, although Blue Thunder didn't talk and wasn't sentient. Clint Eastwood also did his own futuristic aircraft movie Firefox, which is similarly themed, although it leaned more towards sci-fi, with it being about a futuristic jet run on telepathy, with special effects by Star Wars maestro John Dykstra. Compared to both of those projects, Blue Thunder was a little more down-to-earth.
Do you think you can fly it? You flew it, didn't you?
With nothing the Blue Thunder manages to do being especially impossible to imagine, even if it was kind of unlikely for the early 80s. Now, one of the reasons that Blue Thunder works as well as it does is that Columbia truly made an effort to put together an A-level cast and crew who could deliver a high-velocity action movie without it coming off as a cartoon. One key element was director John Badham, who at the time was best known for directing Saturday Night Fever, probably one of the biggest hits of the 70s, and the Frank Langella version of Dracula. Nothing in his body of work, which included a lot of TV, suggested he was the man to helm a big-budget action movie, but he nailed Blue Thunder so well that it immediately established him as Hollywood's go-to guy for this kind of film. In fact, his follow-up to this movie, War Games, actually hit theaters only 2 weeks after Blue Thunder because, again, Blue Thunder was in post-production for a long time. Both movies were pretty big hits and it made him an A-list director. and he directed a couple of really cool 80s movies, including one that I really like called Stakeout. Another key element was the cinematography by John A. Alonzo, who, rather than give Blue Thunder a cartoonish, slick look, opted to make it look as realistic as possible. The score is also an interesting counterpoint to this realism, with Bad Am's regular composer, Arthur B. Rubinstein, crafting a hard-driving synth score similar in some ways to the work that John Carpenter was doing, and it really is something of a classic of its era. Yet, of all the elements that came together to make Blue Thunder fly, probably the most important was the choice of a leading man, Roy Scheider. Had Blue Thunder been made just a few years later, either a big star or a hunk would have gotten his role. His casting is more of a leftover from the 70s, with him having established himself as perhaps the greatest everyman hero in American movies thanks to his iconic role as Chief Brody in Jaws, as well as, of course, Jaws 2, which, of course, isn't critically acclaimed as much as the first Jaws, but actually made quite a bit of money in 1978.
I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chump some of this shit.
In the years since those movies, Scheider had starred in Bob Fosse's All That Jazz to great acclaim, but he wanted to do something commercial, and this would be his follow-up movie, as despite its May 1983 release date, Blue Thunder was actually shot at the end of 1980 and into January of 1981.
12 sharp.
Well, catch you later.
The fact that the movie had seemingly sat on the shelf for a little while became clear when, by the time it hit theaters, one of the movie's stars, Warren Oates, who plays Murphy's angry police chief, had actually already been dead for over a year. Scheider is really terrific in the role. A man of about 50 at the time, Scheider makes Murphy believable as a guy who's been around the block and battered by life, selling his post-traumatic stress syndrome as a NAM veteran shaken up by the fact that he saw his commanding officer murder POWs. Arguably, Murphy is the first in a long line of NAM vet 80s action heroes with PTSD, with Eastwood's hero and Firefox similarly afflicted, as is John Rambo. Riggs and Murtaugh in the Lethal Weapon series are also NAM vets, although their pathos from the war is somewhat downplayed.
Do you want to hear that sometimes I think about eating a bullet? Huh?
Interestingly, Scheider himself, while proud of the movie's success, would lob one criticism at the makers, and it's one that I have to say he's kind of right about. His issue is that one of the big aerial battles, which takes place over downtown LA and involves a missile slamming into the side of the Arco Plaza office building, was a dumb choice as far as logic goes. He argued that Murphy, being a cop who's trying to protect people, would never allow himself to get drawn into an aerial dogfight over a populated area and would have lured them to an unpopulated area. This is the same thing that people have been complaining about with superhero movies for decades now. That said, an aerial dogfight over Los Angeles with the helicopters bobbing and weaving between skyscrapers looks very cool. So even if he's right from a logical standpoint, the movie might not have been as big of a hit had Murphy been a somewhat more responsible hero. And of course, an action movie is really only as good as its villain, and Blue Thunder has a great one.
We'll have a little game. Follow my leader.
Follow my leader.
Malcolm McDowell is probably the last guy you'd cast as a United States Army colonel, especially as no effort whatsoever is made to cover up his English accent. But his good guy, bad guy chemistry with Scheider is spectacular. Scheider is really good at needling him by mocking his accent, and you get a sense that on the fundamental level, these guys absolutely despise each other. Ironically, McDowell, who's always been very upfront about any of his feuds and anybody that he disliked, really seemed to like Scheider, and the two of them got along very well in real life and would often do sci-fi conventions together in their older age, just before, unfortunately, Scheider passed away.
No, I'm telling you. Back off.
Catch you later.
One amusing thing about the movie is that Malcolm McDowell, despite playing an aerial ace, is absolutely deathly afraid of flying. When she saw the movie, his wife at the time, Mary Steenburgen, was amazed that the filmmakers had somehow gotten him to participate in the grueling aerial scenes. Fact is, at the end of the movie, Cochrane's grimaces as the helicopter is going down and, he's dodging bullets and missiles is actually real because you see McDowell was utterly terrified the entire time. The movie also gives Daniel Stern a pretty early role as Murphy's rookie partner, Lyman Good, who's nicknamed Jaffo for just another f***ing observer. Daniel Stern, of course, in 1982 broke out in a big way in the movie Diner, and it also had a pretty good role in the 1979 classic Breaking Away. I love the chemistry he has with Scheider, and you get that him and Murphy would become friendly, with Scheider playing his devastation when Jaffo was murdered in a pretty authentic way. Plus, there's Warren Oates in one of his last great roles as the stock angry captain, who in this case backs up his guy Murphy, even if he is a pain in the ass. Yes, we've seen this part acted out before, and it was even a cliche in 1983, but, Warren Oates, pretty good as the angry police captain, and if he had lived, I think that he probably would have shown up as an angry police captain like every 80s action movie that followed. Plus, American Graffiti's Candy Clark has a nice role as Murphy's unconventional love interest. A single mom whose reputation as hell behind the wheel of a car comes in real handy towards the end, and she's definitely spunkier and has more agency than most love interests of the era. She hasn't put up with his shit, or anybody's shit for that matter. It's very strange that Blue Thunder actually took over 2 years to come out, but one imagines a couple things played a part in this. The post-production had to have been tough for this one, as this was all done in an era long before CGI, so the VFX work was limited to models and real second-unit aerial photography, all of which is quite expensive and quite complex. However, it does make Blue Thunder look a lot more timeless than its cheap competitor, Firefox, which may have beat it to theaters, but looks a lot more dated because it used a lot of high-tech gadgets and blue screen. Another reason that Blue Thunder probably was delayed is that at the time, Columbia had put a ton of money into their big-budget musical Annie, which was directed by John Huston, and, of course, were throwing all their resources behind it. Annie, however, underperformed at the box office, so they needed a hit, and luckily Blue Thunder was that hit. And, in fact, the year after Blue Thunder came out in 1984, they'd have one of the best years ever with The Karate Kid amongst other huge hit movies, including Ghostbusters, that overperformed at the box office and made them an industry leader for a while. It also should be said that maybe the reason Blue Thunder feels like more of an offshoot of 70s paranoia thrillers is the fact that it was written and filmed just as the 70s came to a close and the new decade began. Delays aside though, Blue Thunder was a pretty big hit in 1983. It came out shortly before Return of the Jedi, 2 weeks in fact, and managed to dominate the box office for a little while before, of course, Jedi took over. It made about $42 million domestically. Was it a big blockbuster? No, but it was one of the 20 highest grossing movies of the year, which is pretty good. However, it didn't get a sequel, but Columbia wasted no time turning it into a TV series, and only 6 months after it hit theaters, a short-lived TV series of the same name hit the air, which starred James Ferrantino as a Murphy-esque cop hero, while a young pre-SNL Dana Carvey played Jaffo. The show wasn't well received at all. It was mainly built around outtakes and stock footage from the film. It also didn't help that it was competing with Airwolf, which was another high-concept, high-tech helicopter show which, you guessed it, also had a hero that was afflicted with PTSD from Nam. It was either a ripoff of Blue Thunder or a ripoff of Firefox, but you had to imagine that one of those movies played a big part in Airwolf ever ending up on the air. That said, it was the hit the TV version of Blue Thunder never was. As for the movie, despite its success, and probably because of the show and the fact that audiences just weren't as sequel crazy in the 80s as they are now, it never did receive a follow-up. It did become a staple of HBO though, but it was one and done as a franchise. But where do you really go at the end of this movie? Murphy pointedly destroys the Blue Thunder, so there could be no Blue Thunder 2. However, some years ago, there was talk of remaking Blue Thunder to focus on drones, which actually isn't a bad idea as these things go. There was also a rumor, which turned out to be nonsense, that Christopher Nolan was actually planning to do a quasi-remake of it, but that turned out to not be true. While I'm usually opposed to remakes, I actually think you could do a pretty good one for Blue Thunder, especially if you work in drones and AI and hang on to an everyman hero. A guy like Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Jon Bernthal, or even Idris Elba, guys that are a little bit, have the look of a veteran at this point, could be a cool choice to step into Scheider's shoes. My weird choice would be Michael Shannon, actually, but probably nobody agrees with me on that one. But heck, if you want to reach me, Sony, you can contact me through JoBlo.com. I am available for consultations if the price is right. As it is, though, Blue Thunder is a terrific early 80s action movie with a top-notch hero and villain. You can't get much better than Roy Scheider versus Malcolm McDowell, and it cries out to be less obscure and holds up pretty damn well 43 years after the fact.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.